"Ma'am, I need to see your boarding pass again," the flight attendant said with a dismissive tone. Her eyes narrowed as she examined the ticket. "Your boarding pass has to be confirmed first before you're allowed to board, so you can't board this plane yet. Step aside for others to board." Elise, the black CEO, extended her boarding pass again, her expression calm despite the storm brewing inside her. "There's no mistake. I'm in seat 2A. Soon, a security guard approached, his hand immediately gripping Elise's arm when she tried to explain her situation. His fingers dug into her simple suit jacket as he began pulling her away from the gate. Other passengers looked on, some concerned, some indifferent, some even nodding in approval. But within 30 seconds, something extraordinary happened. The massive departure screens throughout the terminal flickered, then went completely black. The boarding gate's electronic displays froze. Announcements over the PA system abruptly cut off mid-sentence. The confusion in the terminal amplified tenfold. Passengers who had been boarding suddenly stopped in their tracks. Airline staff stared at their dead computer terminals in disbelief. Gate 37B was in complete chaos. Passengers shouting over each other, carry-on luggage scattered across the waiting area, airline staff frantically trying to maintain order but failing miserably. This wasn't just your typical flight delay frustration. Something much bigger was unfolding. This story gives the biggest karma that happens when a woman that was thought to be nothing and denied boarding the plane powerfully revealed who she was and made the airline regret their decision. Have you ever been discriminated against at the airport? Share your experience in the comments. And if you stand against prejudice and injustice, hit that subscribe button right now. Type justice in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. Because this story of justice is just getting started. So who exactly is Elise Washington, and how did she become powerful enough to bring an entire airline to its knees? Elise's journey to becoming one of America's most influential tech CEOs is nothing short of extraordinary. Unlike many tech executives with privileged backgrounds and elite connections, Elise came from absolutely nothing. Her mother worked 3 jobs to keep a roof over their heads in a neighborhood where success stories were few and far between. At 16, Elise was already showing remarkable talent with computers. While other teenagers were hanging out at the mall, she was fixing broken electronics from pawn shops and teaching herself to code on a second-hand computer her high school teacher had salvaged for her. This wasn't just a hobby, this was survival. By 17, she was making enough money repairing computers for local businesses to help her mother pay rent. But the road was never easy. When she applied to college despite perfect SAT scores, she was waitlisted at every top tech school she applied to. When she finally did get into Northwestern on a partial scholarship, she had to work 2 jobs while carrying a full course load. After college, the pattern continued. At her first tech job, she watched as her white male colleagues with less experience were promoted above her. When she created an innovative scheduling algorithm that saved the company millions, her manager took credit for it. When she spoke up, she was labeled difficult and not a team player. But Elise doesn't break, she builds. Instead of fighting a system designed against her success, she created her own system. At 28, she mortgaged everything she owned to start Nexus Technologies. The company's first office, her studio apartment. Her first employees, 3 fellow graduates who believed in her vision enough to work for equity when she couldn't afford salaries. 15 years later, Nexus Technologies employed over 5,000 people globally, reported profits of $1.2 billion. Elise Washington wasn't just successful. She was a force of nature who transformed an industry. The morning of our story, Elise was preparing for what might be the most important deal of her career. In her penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, she packed lightly for her trip to Singapore. The Global Tech Innovation Summit, wasn't just another conference. It was where Elise would deliver the keynote address that would secure a $500 million investment from the Singapore Sovereign Wealth Fund. This investment wouldn't just expand Nexus Technologies, it would fund their most ambitious project yet. But unlike many executives who travel with an entourage, Elise preferred traveling alone on long international flights. It gave her time to think, to prepare, to strategize. For the 20-hour journey ahead, she dressed simple, comfortably but professionally. Black trousers, a silk blouse, and a tailored blazer she could remove during the flight. Her only luxury was a pair of handcrafted leather loafers. What Elise didn't know as she headed to the airport that morning was that her path would cross with Bradley Winters, CEO of SkyGlobe Airlines, a man whose leadership was driving his company straight into the ground. SkyGlobe Airlines was once the pride of American aviation. Founded in the golden age of air travel, it had built its reputation on luxury service and exclusive experiences. Their slogan, "The Sky's Elite," had once represented aspiration. Now, under Bradley Winters' leadership, it had become something else entirely. At 68, Bradley Winters was a third-generation airline executive. His grandfather had founded SkyGlobe, his father had expanded it, and Bradley had inherited the CEO position almost as a birthright. With silver hair always perfectly coiffed and bespoke suits from London tailors, Bradley looked the part of the distinguished executive. But appearances can be deceiving. That morning, Elise's town car pulled up to the departures terminal. She tipped the driver generously. Rolling her carry-on behind her, she entered the terminal, unaware that this routine business trip was about to become anything but routine. Her day of frustration began the moment she stepped through the revolving doors of LaGuardia's Terminal B. Having flown first class hundreds of times before, she approached the premium check-in area, a separate section with plush carpet, minimal lines, and staff trained to cater to SkyGlobe's highest-paying customers. But before she could even reach the counter, the gate agent intercepted her. "Economy check-in is that way, ma'am," the agent said with a dismissive gesture toward the long, snaking line where dozens of passengers waited. Elise paused, took a controlled breath, and politely responded, "I'm flying first class to Singapore." She held up her digital boarding pass on her phone as evidence. The agent barely glanced at it. "Economy check-in is that way," she repeated, this time with visible impatience. It was the first little cut of the day, a small moment that most white travelers would never experience. For Elise, she didn't argue. Instead, she walked to the premium counter anyway, and was greeted by a different agent who processed her check-in without issue, though not without first double-checking her booking with visible surprise. After checking her larger suitcase, Elise headed to security with just her designer carry-on and briefcase. The premium security lane was nearly empty, a perk of first-class travel that usually made the exorbitant ticket prices worth every penny. But as Elise approached the TSA checkpoint, an agent waved her out of the premium lane. "Random security check, ma'am. You'll need to go through enhanced screening." Elise watched as three white businessmen in expensive suits walked through the premium lane without a second glance from the same TSA agent. She looked around at the randomly selected travelers in the enhanced screening line. Every single one was a person of color. When her turn came, the male TSA agent's pat-down went well beyond standard procedure. His hands lingered too long. He checked the same areas multiple times. His touch was firmer than necessary. The humiliation burned inside her, but Elise maintained her composure. She'd learned long ago that showing anger would only make things worse. She'd be labeled as the angry black woman, giving them justification for their treatment. As she collected her belongings after the screening, she immediately noticed something was missing. Her watch. Not just any watch, but a custom-designed Patek Philippe worth over $60,000. It had been a gift to herself when Nexus Technologies went public. More than its monetary value, it symbolized everything she had overcome. "Excuse me," she said to the TSA agent. "My watch is missing." The agent barely looked up. If it was there, it would have come through. It was there. I placed it in the bin myself. What followed was 15 minutes of Elise insisting on reviewing security footage while agents suggested she must have forgotten her watch at home. Finally, after she refused to move and threatened to call her attorney, a supervisor miraculously found the watch in a separate bin, one that Elise had never used. By the time she reached Gate 37B, boarding for her flight to Singapore had already begun. Despite the delays at security, she still had plenty of time to board. First-class passengers are typically boarded first or given the option to board at their convenience. As she approached the first-class boarding lane, a gate agent named Meredith, her name tag clearly visible, looked at Elise with immediate suspicion. "Excuse me, ma'am, this lane is for our first-class passengers only." Elise held up her boarding pass once again. "Yes, I'm aware. I'm in seat 2A. Meredith took the boarding pass and scrutinized it as though it were written in a foreign language. She frowned, then looked up at Elise with obvious disbelief. "One moment, please." She picked up a phone and spoke in hushed tones, occasionally glancing up at Elise with narrowed eyes. By now, several passengers had begun to notice the interaction. A supervisor approached, a man in his late 50s with a permanent scowl etched into his face. His name tag read, Richard Bronson, Customer Service Supervisor. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, directing his question to Meredith rather than to Elise. "She says she has a first-class ticket," Meredith replied, emphasizing the word says, as though Elise's claim was dubious at best. Richard took the boarding pass and eyed Elise from head to toe, taking in her comfortable but clearly expensive travel attire. "Ma'am, are you aware that first-class tickets on international flights are very expensive?" The question hung in the air, its implication clear to everyone within earshot. A few nearby passengers snickered. Others looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Elise's expression didn't change. "We'll need to verify your ticket. There seems to be some kind of irregularity." He stressed the last word as though he'd caught her in the act of fraud. "What irregularity?" Elise asked. "I'll need to see additional documentation. Passport, credit card used for purchase, and company authorization for the expenditure." This was not standard procedure. This was not required of other passengers. This was harassment disguised as security protocol. By now, several passengers had their phones out, recording the interaction. One older white woman muttered audibly, "Just show your papers if you have nothing to hide." Elise provided her passport and corporate credit card, though she rightfully refused to show any company authorization, a document that isn't required by any airline for any passenger, regardless of ticket class. "You'll need to step aside while we verify this information," Richard insisted. "The flight needs to continue boarding." And so, as other first-class passengers boarded with nothing more than a cursory glance at their boarding passes, Elise was escorted to a customer service desk away from the gate. She was told the verification would just take a few minutes. Those few minutes stretched into 20, then 40, then over an hour. Elise sat at the desk, watching the minutes tick by on her reclaimed watch. No updates were provided. No explanations were offered. She repeatedly asked about the status of her verification, only to be told, "We're working on it." From where she sat, she could see her gate. She could see the final boarding calls being made. She could see the door to the jet bridge slowly closing. But what she could also see and hear was a group of Skyglobe employees huddled at a nearby counter, occasionally glancing her way and laughing. Though they tried to keep their voices down in the busy but acoustically unforgiving airport terminal, fragments of their conversation reached her. "Thinks she belongs in first class. Probably her first time on a plane. Bet she won't be so bold when she misses her flight. Each word was a dagger. But what cut deeper was watching her flight. A flight she had every right to be on, in a seat she had paid thousands for, depart without her. The boarding door closed, the jet bridge pulled back. Through the large windows she watched her plane taxi away. Only then did Richard return to the desk. I regret to inform you that while we were verifying your information, your flight has departed, he said without a hint of actual regret. Unfortunately, you missed your boarding time. Elise's voice remained steady, despite the rage and hurt building inside her. I missed my boarding time because your staff deliberately detained me on false pretenses. Richard ignored her accusation completely. We can rebook you on the next flight to Singapore, which departs in approximately 5 hours. However, I'm afraid the first class is fully booked. We can offer you an economy seat. This was the final insult, not just denying her the seat she had paid for, but downgrading her while pocketing the substantial difference in fare. Show me the booking system, Elise demanded. I want to see the first-class manifest for that flight. Ma'am, I'm not authorized to. Show me the system, Elise repeated, standing now, or I'll have my company's legal team check every record for that flight. Her calm confidence must have rattled him, because to her slight surprise, Richard turned the monitor toward her. Whether he thought she wouldn't understand what she was looking at, or whether he simply panicked, we'll never know. But what Elise saw confirmed her suspicions. There were 3 open seats in first class on the next flight. You're lying to me, she said simply. There are 3 available first-class seats. Richard quickly turned the monitor away. Those are blocked for operational reasons. What operational reasons? I'm not at liberty to discuss. Discriminatory reasons, Elise said, her voice rising just enough to be heard by nearby passengers. You prevented me from boarding my original flight, and now you're lying about availability to keep me out of first class on the next one. Several other travelers had stopped to watch the confrontation unfold. Some had their phones out, sensing that something significant was happening. I demand to be rebooked in first class on the next flight as compensation for missing my original flight due to your staff's actions, Elise stated firmly. Richard's face flushed red. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice. I will not be silenced when I'm being discriminated against, Elise replied, her voice perfectly controlled, but carrying enough to be heard clearly by those around her. That's when Richard made the call that would ultimately destroy his company. He signaled to security. 2 guards approached rapidly, and the taller one immediately grabbed Elise's arm with unnecessary force. Ma'am, you need to come with us now, he said gruffly. Take your hands off me, Elise said. I have done nothing wrong. The guard tightened his grip, yanking her away from the counter. The sudden movement caused Elise to lose her balance, and her phone and documents scattered across the floor. As she bent to retrieve them, she noticed a familiar figure watching the scene from a short distance away. Even without the media photos she'd seen, she would have recognized Bradley Winters by his air of entitlement alone. The Sky Globe CEO was observing the situation with what could only be described as satisfaction. As the security guards continued to usher her away, she heard Bradley turn to a colleague and mutter words that would soon come back to haunt him. Some people just don't know their place. It was at that precise moment, as she was being forcibly escorted through the terminal while other passengers stared and whispered, that Elise's phone rang. What would you do if you were in Elise's shoes? Would you have agreed to board the next flight in economy, or would you stand your ground to remain in first class? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button now to not miss these stories. Elise Washington carefully gathered her scattered documents from the floor, her movements deliberate and unhurried, despite the security guards looming over her. Her phone continued to ring, the custom ringtone indicating it was Marcus Chen, her chief strategy officer. This wasn't a call she could ignore, even in the midst of chaos. "I need to take this," she said to the guards, her tone making it clear this wasn't a request. Elise stepped slightly aside, maintaining eye contact with the security personnel to ensure they didn't attempt to physically remove her again. "Marcus," she answered, her voice immediately shifting to her business tone. "What's the status?" What the security guards didn't know, what Bradley Winters himself didn't know as he watched from a distance with smug satisfaction, was that this call would be the beginning of the end for Sky Globe Airlines. "Elise, the Singapore Sovereign Fund needs our decision by tomorrow morning," Marcus explained urgently. "They need to know which airline we're recommending for the global corporate contract before they finalize the acquisition paperwork." And here was the first revelation that would change everything. Her company wasn't just a client of various airlines. They were conducting the final evaluation for a global corporate contract worth $3.7 billion over 5 years. Whichever airline secured this contract would provide exclusive travel services for over 40 multinational corporations within the Nexus Technologies partner network. Sky Globe had been on the shortlist, along with 2 other major carriers. Elisa's flight today was supposed to be the final evaluation of Sky Globe's international first-class service, a test they had just catastrophically failed without ever knowing they were being tested. "I've seen enough," Elise replied, looking directly at Bradley Winters as though he could hear her. "Remove Sky Globe from consideration immediately. Draft the recommendation for Singapore Airlines instead." But Marcus had more urgent news. "There's another issue, Elise. The market is getting nervous about our position in Sky Globe. There are rumors that we might be divesting," Marcus said. And here was the second bombshell. Behind the scenes, through a private investment firm, Elise Washington personally controlled 28% of Sky Globe's stock. Combined, they represented the single largest ownership block in the struggling airline, larger even than the shares held by the Winters family. Most passengers watching the scene unfold had no idea that the woman being mistreated held enough stock to destroy the company's valuation with a single sell order. "The Singapore conference isn't just about our recommendation, Elise," Marcus continued. "Everyone is expecting your keynote to signal the green light for our acquisition talks." And there was the third revelation. The Singapore conference wasn't merely about securing a $500 million investment. It was about finalizing Nexus Technologies' acquisition of Aerosphere Airways, Sky Globe's largest competitor in the Asian market. A move that would fundamentally reshape the airline industry for decades to come. The security guards shifted uncomfortably, sensing that this seemingly routine situation was evolving into something far beyond their pay grade. One of them spoke into his radio, updating someone about the situation at Terminal B. Elisa's mind worked with the calculating precision that had made her a legend in the tech industry. In less than 10 seconds, she had formulated a plan that would deliver both justice and a powerful business lesson. "Marcus, I need you to do something right now. Contact our legal team and activate our voting shares. Call for an emergency board meeting of Sky Globe Airlines, today, not tomorrow. Cite shareholder concern over discriminatory practices and potential civil rights violations." She paused, watching Bradley Winters, who was now engaged in what appeared to be an increasingly heated conversation with Richard Bronson, the supervisor who had denied her boarding. "And Marcus, execute Plan Delta." Plan Delta wasn't just a dramatic phrase she had invented on the spot for effect. It was a strategy developed years ago for situations exactly like this, when discrimination threatened not just her dignity but the integrity of her business operations. As Elise ended the call with Marcus, she immediately placed another to her CFO, then her legal counsel, then the head of her PR team. Each conversation lasted less than 30 seconds. Each set in motion a different aspect of her response. The security guards still hovered nearby, but now they seemed uncertain. One kept glancing at his radio, waiting for instructions. The other was openly staring at Elise with growing recognition, as though trying to place her face. Across the terminal, Bradley Winters was now gesturing angrily in Elise's direction while speaking to an airport police officer. From his body language and occasional glances her way, it was clear he was trying to have her removed from the airport entirely. "She's being disruptive and threatening our staff." Bradley's voice carried across the space as his volume increased with frustration. "I want her escorted out of this terminal immediately." Unfortunately, a small group of passengers, the same ones who had been recording the confrontation earlier, began to vocally support Bradley's demand. "Get her out of here." A middle-aged man in a golf shirt called out, "Some people don't know how to behave in public." "She's holding up everyone else," a woman added. And then the ugliest comment of all, shouted by a red-faced man who seemed emboldened by the growing hostility, "Go fly with your own kind." The naked racism hung in the air, shocking even some of those who had been quietly judgmental before. A few passengers looked down, uncomfortable with the explicit hatred now on display. Others moved away, not wanting to be associated with such blatant bigotry. But something unexpected happened when the airport police officer approached Elise. Instead of immediately moving to escort her out, he hesitated. His eyes widened slightly with recognition. "Miss Washington?" he asked quietly. "Elise Washington from Nexus Technologies?" The officer, whose name tag read Officer James Taylor, had recognized her from a recent cover feature in Business Weekly magazine highlighting the most influential black executives in America. "You were just on the cover of Business Weekly," he continued, keeping his voice low. "My daughter did her school report on you last month. She wants to be a software engineer because of you." This small moment of recognition, of being seen as who she truly was, rather than what biased assumptions made her out to be, changed her reaction. Officer Taylor positioned himself subtly between Elise and the increasingly hostile group of passengers. It wasn't obvious, but he had made a choice about whose safety he was prioritizing. And then it began. Throughout the terminal, the electronic departure boards flickered. The screens showing CNN Airport Network in the waiting areas momentarily went black, then returned with breaking financial news. The chyron at the bottom of the screen told the story. Breaking, SkyGlobe Airlines shares drops amid rumors of major shareholder sell-off. Travelers throughout the terminal began to notice, pointing at the screens and murmuring to each other. Some pulled out phones to check their investment apps. The atmosphere in Terminal B subtly shifted as the financial drama began to overshadow the personal one. On the screens, financial analysts were already speculating about the cause of the sudden stock movement. One mentioned unconfirmed reports of discriminatory incidents and potential civil rights violations that could expose the airline to significant legal liability. Marcus Chen had wasted no time in executing Plan Delta. Bradley Winters' phone rang, then rang again, and again. His face, already flushed with anger, now drained of color as he glanced at the screen of his phone. He stepped away to take the call, his entire demeanor transforming from aggressive to defensive in an instant. The SkyGlobe CEO paced back and forth, occasionally glancing toward Elise with growing recognition and alarm. Whatever he was hearing on the other end of that call was clearly devastating news. Across the terminal, other SkyGlobe executives who happened to be at the airport that day were receiving similar calls. The panic spread visibly among staff as word traveled through hushed whispers and wide-eyed glances. Then, a new commotion at the terminal entrance drew attention. A group of men and women in immaculate suits marched purposefully through the doors, led by a young woman in her 30s with the confident stride of someone who navigated corporate battlefields daily. Samantha Rivera, Elise's executive assistant, had arrived with reinforcements. Behind her walked 4 members of Nexus Technologies' legal team, each carrying leather portfolios and wearing expressions that would make any corporate executive reconsider their life choices. Samantha spotted Elise immediately and moved directly toward her, the legal team following in perfect formation. "The documents you requested," Samantha said, handing Elise a slim leather portfolio. "And the board members have been notified. They're assembling via video conference in 30 minutes." Elise nodded, taking the portfolio and opening it to review its contents. Inside were printouts of Sky Globe's own non-discrimination policies. With her team now beside her, Elise straightened her jacket and began walking, not toward the exit as Bradley had demanded, but back toward Gate 37B, where her confrontation had begun. Officer Taylor made no move to stop her. The security guards looked to each other uncertainly, receiving no clear instructions through their radios, as the chain of command at Sky Globe was now in disarray. Elise walked with purpose, her legal team flanking her like an honor guard. Passengers moved aside, some recording with their phones, others watching with the fascinated expression of people witnessing history without fully understanding it yet. As she approached the gate area, the airport's PA system crackled to life. "Attention all passengers. Due to an administrative action, all Sky Globe Airlines flights are temporarily grounded. Sky Globe passengers should stand by for further information. We apologize for any inconvenience." The announcement repeated in Spanish, then Mandarin, then French. Throughout the terminal, Sky Globe passengers looked up in confusion and growing anger. Gate agents were suddenly bombarded with questions they couldn't answer. The airline's operations had effectively frozen in place. Bradley Winters, still on his phone at the far end of the terminal, looked up at the announcement with an expression of pure horror. In that moment, he finally connected the dots between the woman his staff had discriminated against and the financial catastrophe now unfolding around him. Elise hadn't just been denied boarding or a seat in first class, she had been denied her dignity. And now, Sky Globe Airlines was about to learn exactly how costly that mistake would be. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change the airline industry forever. Bradley Winters versus Elise Washington. Old prejudices versus new power. Discrimination versus justice. And it was about to play out in front of hundreds of witnesses, thousands of social media viewers, and millions of stockholders. Gate 37B had transformed from an ordinary airport gate into ground zero of what would soon be called the Sky Globe Reckoning. The announcement that all flights were grounded had created instant chaos. Hundreds of passengers crowded the customer service desks, demanding explanations, refunds, and alternative travel arrangements. "What do you mean all flights are grounded? I have a connecting flight to catch. This is outrageous. I paid thousands for my ticket. Someone better explain what's happening right now." The Sky Globe staff, completely unprepared for this situation, did what frightened people often do when facing an angry mob. They looked for a scapegoat, and they found one in Elise Washington. "Ma'am, if you hadn't disrupted our boarding procedures, none of this would be happening," Meredith, the gate agent who had first questioned Elise's ticket, announced loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. Richard Bronson, the supervisor, joined in. "This woman has caused a major disruption to our operations because she couldn't follow simple instructions." Their strategy worked, at least initially. Several passengers turned toward Elise with renewed anger, now blaming her for their travel woes. "Is she the reason our flights are canceled?" one man demanded. "Why is one person allowed to ruin travel plans for hundreds of people?" Another shouted. The crowd was growing hostile, closing in around Elise and her legal team. Officer Taylor positioned himself closer to her, sensing the escalating tension. What happened next would become one of the most viewed viral videos of the year. With calm determination, Elise stepped away from her legal team, moved to a nearby row of seats, and gracefully stepped onto a chair to elevate herself above the crowd. "My name is Elise Washington," she began, her voice carrying across the gate area with the same commanding presence that had captivated audiences in boardrooms and conference halls worldwide. "I am the CEO of Nexus Technologies and the founder of Horizon Capital." The simple act of claiming her identity and position, of refusing to be diminished or erased, immediately changed the energy in the terminal. Some passengers pulled out phones to search her name, eyes widening as they realized who was speaking. "I came to this airport today as a paying customer with a valid first-class ticket, just like many of you. I was denied boarding not because of anything I did wrong, but because of what I look like." A hush fell over the immediate area as passengers stopped to listen. Even those who had been hostile moments before seemed compelled by her dignified presence. "What happened to me today is not unique. It happens to people who look like me every day in airports across this country. The difference is that today, it happened to someone with the power to demand accountability." At that precise moment, Bradley Winters arrived at the gate, breathing heavily from having rushed across the terminal. He froze at the sight of Elise standing elevated above the crowd, commanding the attention of everyone present. Attention that, as CEO, he believed should be his alone. A Skyglobe executive leaned in and whispered urgently in his ear. Bradley's expression shifted from anger to shock to something resembling fear as he finally understood exactly who Elise Washington was and what power she wielded over his company. The situation escalated further as the first media crews arrived, local news stations that had been tipped off about a developing story at LaGuardia. Cameras and microphones appeared, reporters pushing through the crowd to get closer to the action. Bradley immediately moved to intercept them. "This is a private matter concerning Skyglobe Airlines. No media is permitted in this area." But Officer Taylor stepped forward. "This is a public terminal, sir. The media has every right to be here as long as they don't interfere with security operations." The cameras turned instantly toward the confrontation between Bradley and the officer, capturing the Skyglobe CEO's growing frustration and panic. Elise continued speaking, now aware that her words were being broadcast beyond just the terminal. "Today, Skyglobe Airlines showed its true colors, not just to me, but to all of you, and now to the world. What you may not know is that through my investment firm, Horizon Capital, I control 28% of Skyglobe's stock, making me the largest shareholder in the company." Gasps and murmurs spread through the crowd. Several passengers who had been hostile now looked decidedly uncomfortable. Bradley Winters pushed through the crowd, desperate to take control of the situation. He reached the area where Elise stood, his face a mask of forced cordiality. "Miss Washington," he began, loud enough for the cameras to catch, "there's clearly been a terrible misunderstanding. On behalf of Skyglobe Airlines, I want to personally apologize for any inconvenience you've experienced today." Elise looked down at him with the calm gaze of someone who had dealt with men like Bradley her entire career. Men who believed a simple apology could erase deeply ingrained patterns of discrimination. "This isn't about inconvenience, Mr. Winters. This is about systemic discrimination embedded in your corporate culture. Discrimination that you have personally fostered and encouraged." Bradley's artificial smile faltered. "I assure you, Skyglobe has strict non-discrimination policies." "Policies that exist on paper but not in practice," Elise interrupted. She turned to Samantha, who handed her a tablet. "For the past 6 months, my team has been documenting discriminatory incidents on Skyglobe flights and at Skyglobe facilities." This was the bombshell revelation no one had anticipated. On the tablet, Elise pulled up a report with dates, times, and details of dozens of incidents, complete with photographic evidence and testimony. "I sent mystery shoppers on your airlines, people of different races, religions, and backgrounds, all traveling with identical tickets and itineraries. The disparities in how they were treated are not just disturbing, they're legally actionable. Bradley's face had gone from red to pale as the implications sank in. Camera crews pushed closer, capturing every moment of his visible distress. "Miss Washington?" he tried again, lowering his voice. "Perhaps we could discuss this privately. I'd be happy to offer you our corporate jet to Singapore, and we can discuss compensation for today's unfortunate events." Elise's response was measured but firm. "Today wasn't unfortunate, Mr. Winters. It was inevitable. When you build a corporate culture on exclusion rather than inclusion, when you dismiss diversity initiatives as PR stunts, when you tell your colleagues that some people don't know their place, this is the result." Bradley's eyes widened at hearing his own words quoted back to him. "You couldn't possibly have heard." "I heard everything," Elise stated simply. "And more importantly, I've been listening to your passengers, your employees, and the communities you claim to serve." As if on cue, a middle-aged black woman stepped forward from the crowd. "I've been flying Skyglobe for 15 years as a business traveler," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I've been randomly selected for additional screening every single time. Every time." An elderly Asian man joined her. "They made me change seats last month because a white passenger didn't want to sit next to me. The flight attendant said it was to make everyone comfortable." One by one, passengers began sharing their own experiences of discrimination on Skyglobe flights. Each story built upon the last, creating a damning portrait of a company culture rooted in bias and exclusion. Meanwhile, the passengers who had earlier hurled racist comments began to quietly edge away from the scene, clearly hoping to escape before being identified. But in our age of smartphones and social media, nothing remains hidden for long. Several onlookers had recorded their earlier comments, and these videos were already circulating on Twitter and Instagram, complete with hashtags identifying them. Elise let each person speak, giving weight and validation to experiences that had too often been dismissed or denied. When they finished, she addressed not just the crowd at Gate 37B, but the growing audience watching live streams across the world. "Discrimination isn't just morally wrong, it's bad business," she said. "Skyglobe Airlines has been losing market share for 8 consecutive quarters because it refuses to acknowledge that the world has changed. Today's consumers expect better. They demand better, and they deserve better." She turned directly to Bradley. "I came here today not just as a passenger, but as someone evaluating your airline for a potential $3 billion corporate contract for international business travel. I was also considering a full acquisition of Skyglobe to expand Nexus Technologies' transportation division." Bradley Winters looked as though he might collapse on the spot. The potential deals she mentioned represented the lifeline his struggling airline desperately needed. A lifeline he had just watched slip away due to his own company's discriminatory practices. "But based on what I've experienced and documented," Elise continued, "I cannot in good conscience recommend Skyglobe to my partners or consider it for acquisition. Not without fundamental changes to its leadership and culture." By now, the confrontation had become the top trending topic on social media. Skyglobe Reckoning and Elise Washington were trending worldwide. The live streams had hundreds of thousands of concurrent viewers, all watching as decades of discriminatory airline practices were being exposed in real time. The situation escalated further when 3 members of Skyglobe's board of directors arrived at the terminal, having been alerted to the crisis. They approached with visible alarm, clearly recognizing the catastrophic damage being done to the company's reputation and stock value with each passing minute. "Ms. Washington," the lead director said, "we understand your concerns and take them extremely seriously. We would like to convene an emergency board meeting immediately to address these issues." Elise nodded. "That's exactly what I called for an hour ago." The group moved toward a private airport lounge that had been hastily secured for the impromptu board meeting. As Bradley Winters followed, visibly shaken, cameras tracked his every move. The difference between his confident swagger earlier and his current defeated posture told the entire story without a single word. Inside the airport's premium lounge, now cleared of other passengers, Skyglobe's board members assembled physically and virtually. Large screens showed the faces of directors who couldn't be present in person, but had joined via video conference. Every one of them wore expressions of grave concern. Elise and her legal team laid out their evidence methodically and devastatingly. The documentation was incontrovertible. Emails from Bradley dismissing diversity concerns, statistics showing patterns of discriminatory treatment, testimony from former employees about explicit directives to treat certain passengers differently than others. As the presentation continued, Bradley's breathing became labored. He loosened his tie, his face flushing an alarming shade of red. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the lounge's cool temperature. Halfway through the presentation of evidence, as Elise was explaining how discrimination had cost Skyglobe 3 major corporate accounts in the previous year, Bradley suddenly clutched his chest and collapsed into his chair. I can't, he gasped before slumping sideways. The room erupted in panic. Is there a doctor? Someone called out. Without hesitation, Elise took charge. Call an ambulance immediately. She directed one of the board members. Then she loosened Bradley's tie completely and helped move him into a recovery position on the floor. It was a striking image. The woman who had every reason to despise this man was now the one ensuring he received proper care in his moment of crisis. Even as Bradley Winters faced the consequences of his actions, Elise Washington demonstrated the compassion and humanity he had denied to so many others. The paramedics arrived within minutes, quickly determining that Bradley was experiencing symptoms consistent with a severe panic attack, coupled with extreme stress reaction. Not a heart attack, as initially feared. As they prepared to transport him to the hospital, he looked up at Elise with what appeared to be genuine shock at her intervention on his behalf. With Bradley on his way to the hospital, the board meeting reconvened. The directors, now fully aware of the magnitude of the crisis facing their company, moved quickly to damage control. After less than 30 minutes of deliberation, the board chairman announced their decision. The airline had been shut down due to Elise pulling out her shares. Bradley Winters would be suspended immediately, pending a full investigation. And an interim CEO would be appointed from outside the current executive team to ensure impartiality and help the airline build up again. Furthermore, the board unanimously approved the formation of an independent committee to investigate discriminatory practices throughout the organization and recommend comprehensive reforms. They requested that Elise's team share their full documentation with this committee. As the meeting concluded, the board chairman addressed Elise directly. Ms. Washington, we cannot undo what happened to you today or to countless others over the years, but we can commit to ensuring it never happens again. We would welcome your guidance in this process of transformation. Elise's response was measured but firm. Real change requires more than apologies and committees. It requires a fundamental shift in culture from the top down. I'll be watching closely to see if Skyglobe is truly committed to that shift. As Elise exited the lounge with her team, she found the terminal had transformed. The anger that had greeted her earlier had been replaced with something altogether different. Respect, admiration, and in many cases, gratitude. Passengers approached to shake her hand. Airport staff who had been reluctant to get involved earlier now nodded in acknowledgement as she passed. And the media, sensing that they were documenting a pivotal moment in corporate America, captured every moment. The confrontation at Gate 37B, proved to be just the beginning of a transformation that would ripple through not just SkyGlobe Airlines, but the entire industry. But the most surprising developments were still to come. 1 week after the confrontation at Gate 37B, the world witnessed something unprecedented in aviation history. The Grand Ballroom in Manhattan was filled to capacity with journalists from around the globe. The SkyGlobe logo, once a symbol of prestige, now hung behind the podium like a relic of a bygone era. The interim board chair, Dr. Janet Rivera, notably the first Latina to hold such a position in a major airline, approached the microphone. The room fell silent. After careful consideration and preliminary findings from our internal audit, the board of directors has made the difficult but necessary decision to suspend all SkyGlobe operations, effective immediately. The announcement sent shockwaves through the industry. Never before had an airline of SkyGlobe's size voluntarily grounded its entire fleet outside of a national emergency. Over 250 aircraft would sit idle at airports across the globe. More than 21,000 employees would be placed on paid leave during what was described as a comprehensive restructuring. The financial cost was staggering, estimated at over $35 million per day. Dr. Rivera's introduction, she made it clear that the cost of continuing business as usual would have been far greater. Some have asked why such a drastic measure is necessary, Rivera began, her voice steady and resolute. My answer is simple. Sometimes you need to tear down the foundation to rebuild properly. SkyGlobe's issues aren't superficial problems that can be fixed with sensitivity training or policy memos. The discrimination was structural, embedded in the company's culture from its highest levels to its daily operations. The cameras panned across the room, capturing the solemn faces of board members who had come to recognize the full extent of their company's failings. Many had initially resisted the idea of a complete shutdown, arguing for less dramatic remedies. But the preliminary audit findings had silenced those objections. Throughout the week following the LaGuardia incident, SkyGlobe terminals across the world had transformed into ghost towns. Ticketing counters stood empty. Check-in kiosks displayed temporarily unavailable messages. Maintenance hangars were quiet, except for the minimal staff performing essential aircraft preservation work. At JFK Airport, a time-lapse camera captured the SkyGlobe fleet being towed to remote stands, their engines covered, their livery suddenly looking like artifacts from a company that already belonged to history. The airline industry, accustomed to continuous operation regardless of circumstances, watched in disbelief as one of its oldest members voluntarily removed itself from the skies. SkyGlobe Airlines will remain closed, Dr. Rivera continued at the press conference, until we have implemented new leadership, new policies, and new cultural safeguards that ensure every passenger and employee is treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their race, gender, religion, or background. What few people expected was the profound remorse expressed by some of the very employees who had been part of the discriminatory culture. In an emotional interview with CNN, Meredith Thompson, the gate agent who had first denied Elise boarding, spoke through tears about her own complicity. I've spent 10 years working for SkyGlobe, and I never once questioned the patterns I was participating in, she admitted. We were trained to provide extra scrutiny to certain passengers, but it was never explicitly called racial profiling. It was coded in language about security concerns or passenger comfort. Meredith had since volunteered to join an employee committee working with the independent auditors to identify and address discriminatory practices. I can't change what I did, she said, but I can help make sure it never happens again. Meanwhile, at New York Presbyterian Hospital, Bradley Winters was recovering from what doctors had diagnosed as stress-induced cardiovascular episode. Television footage showed him watching the press conference announcing the airline's suspension, his expression transforming from disbelief to something resembling understanding. as the full consequences of his leadership became clear. According to sources close to him, Bradley had been uncharacteristically quiet during his recovery, declining to issue statements or mount a defense of his actions. One hospital staff member reported overhearing him say, "She was right," though whether he meant Elise or someone else wasn't clear. 2 weeks into the shutdown, the independent auditors released their preliminary findings, and they were even more damning than anticipated. The impact extended far beyond SkyGlobe. Within days of the audit's release, competing airlines began announcing their own diversity initiatives, clearly fearing similar scrutiny. United Airlines launched a comprehensive review of its customer service practices. Delta established an independent oversight committee for discrimination complaints. American Airlines announced mandatory anti-bias training for all staff. What we're seeing, noted aviation industry analyst Maria Chen, is an unprecedented moment of self-examination across the entire airline industry. The SkyGlobe incident has forced every carrier to confront practices they've ignored or denied for decades. 3 months after the LaGuardia confrontation, the transformation of the aviation landscape was evident. The Department of Transportation announced new regulations requiring airlines to track and report data on passenger treatment by race and other demographic factors. Industry associations established certification programs for equity in customer service. Insurance companies began offering lower rates to airlines with robust anti-discrimination programs. At LaGuardia Airport, Gate 37B, where everything had begun, was being renovated. The SkyGlobe signage had been removed, but a new sign covered in blue construction wrap bore the teaser, "Coming soon, a new way to fly." Behind the barricades, workers were installing a completely redesigned gate area featuring accessibility enhancements, prayer rooms, multilingual signage, and culturally inclusive artwork. 6 months after operations were suspended, SkyGlobe Airlines returned to the skies with new leadership, new policies, and a new commitment to inclusion. Their first flight, symbolically from New York to Singapore, was piloted by Captain Diane Rodriguez, the airline's first Latina chief pilot. Serving as lead flight attendant was Michael Chen, who had previously filed a discrimination suit against the airline but had returned under the new management. And while Bradley Winters never returned to the aviation industry, sources reported that he had begun volunteering with community organizations focused on economic opportunities for minority youth. A surprising epilogue to a career defined by exclusion rather than inclusion. The airline industry would never be the same. And it all began because one woman refused to accept being denied her rightful boarding and seat. If this story moved you, like and hit that subscribe button right now, and share to others so they can learn too. See you in our next story.